Alright, welcome to another video, and before we get started, I'd like to take a quick minute to thank all the Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members whose names you see scrolling across the screen right now. They make this financially possible, and without you, I probably wouldn't be here making videos, so thank you. Alright, so we're off with the flight. We're flying the Avatar HD Pro kit with a V2 transmitter and the new camera. I have everything mounted in the ARWing Pro. And we're just going to kind of take it out. As you can see, the sun is kind of low on the horizon there. So we're just going to kind of take it out for a little ways, a few miles or whatever, and see how the camera looks. And kind of just finish getting the AR Pro set up. So like I said, this is the first time I've flown it since installing the Avatar Walksnail, whatever, HD system in it. So we had to make a few changes in the RG Pilot for the MSP, DisplayPort OSD, and things like that. And speaking of OSD, you can see I've kind of arranged everything out to fit the HD grid, but my AHI is a little bit high. So we're going to kind of jump ahead in the video here. You'll see I kind of move that artificial horizon down one row of characters on the OSD. And to do that, I just let the airplane kind of fly straight and level right here just to get an actual feel for where the real horizon is at. And you see there, we've just kind of moved it down. And now my home distance and direction indicator there is a little bit too far off to the right, so we'll bump that over one character to the left to kind of center that up. And I'm able to do that live while in flight because I'm using the telemetry link through the Dragon Link system, which is basically kind of equivalent of having the USB cable plugged in the flight controller. I have a full bidirectional Mavlink connection to the flight controller, so I'm able to do these changes live from my computer with Mission Planner while I'm actually flying in the air. So now that we got all that kind of looking good and everything, we'll kind of play around with the pan servo. Now you notice there is a little bit of jello in the video. I guess I have a little bit of vibration in the motor that I hadn't really noticed with the analog camera before, but at certain RPM ranges, different throttle settings, I do see that kind of jello creeping in. But yeah, so we do have a pan servo now on the ARWing Pro. That's another change I made. I'm using a pan servo with about 270 degrees of rotation, which paired with the field of view on the camera gives me enough range to look back and see the antenna, which is pretty much center of the airplane. You can kind of see that here. But yeah, like I say, we're just a few minutes into the flight, and you can see the sun is pretty low on the horizon, so we're kind of getting ready for the sunset. Now, this part of the video here, I wanted to show you, we're just kind of cruising out over town, and still kind of playing around with the pan servo and looking back at the sun, kind of trying out the dynamic range and things like that on the camera. But one thing I want to point out, you notice we have the red blinking border around the video right now. But the signal is pretty stable at 7 megabits per second. It's actually kind of bumping up a little higher here and there, but it never really gets below 7. And we're getting that low signal indication, which seems to be coming in a little bit earlier than what I remember previously. And as I pan the camera there and looked around, you can kind of see there's really no degradation in the video quality. So I'm not really sure why the warning is coming in that early. You can see we kind of dropped down to about 2 megabits per second there. 2, 3, 5 here and there is kind of fluctuating a bit at this point. You do see a little bit of kind of pixelation blockiness in the sky there, which is usually the first to go. It tends to keep the detail on the ground and it'll pixelate the sky first. But yeah, you can see we're getting down in about the 2 megabits per second there during this turn. And one thing I noticed as I turn back towards home, it seems to get a little bit worse. So at this point, I went ahead and gained some altitude and kind of climbed right up to 400 feet or so, just to see if the signal would come back a little bit with more altitude. And it did come back up again to that 13 megabits per second, where it kind of seemed to like to sit here. And the image quality looks back to normal and all that. So you can see here, if we skip ahead a bit, as we're flying home, we do have that warning showing up again. And we're still at 7 megabits per second. So again, I'm not sure why the warning shows up as early as it does. Maybe that's something that changed in the latest firmware. I don't really know. But I notice now that as I'm flying directly back home, even now I'm only like 2 miles out, but we do have like 400 feet of altitude. And at 4 miles, we should have a pretty stable, good signal here at this range. But like I said, we were down in the low bit rate and we had the warning. But you can see now I'm kind of looking over the right wing and I want it to look down into the wooded area a little bit. And because I only have pan, I don't have tilt. So I kind of banked the airplane a little bit so I could look down into the woods. And as I did, we kind of got off course and we're not flying directly at home now. And you'll notice we jumped right back up to 25 megabits per second bit rate. So I was kind of thinking at this point that maybe being with the shorter stock antenna mounted behind the camera like it is, maybe that camera is kind of blocking my antenna on the way home here. And to address that and to test that theory, actually, we're going to skip over to another flight here. Now you can see this is on another day here. I was kind of flying out to the same little point, that 2 mile tree line that I kind of used for a little point of interest for some of my first videos with Walk Snail, and kind of ignore the fact that the airplane is getting knocked around, tossed around in the wind pretty bad. But out to this point, on the way out, you might have noticed I had 25 megabits per second and it was pretty stable holding that bit rate right out to 2 miles at only 160 feet of altitude. And once we made that turn home, we kind of dropped down back into the 13 megabits per second, but the signal is really stable and quality is fine and all. So at this point, I went ahead and turned north to fly back to this different little corner of this kind of overgrown area that you'll see right kind of bottom center of the screen there. Usually, if I fly out to this corner, I'll lose video right near this corner, and you can see during my turn here is where we pretty much started to get some breakup. Bitrate dropped out pretty bad, and the reasoning, if you look, we're pointed directly at home right now, and there's kind of a curve in the bayou and a big metal shop that kind of gets in the way and blocks the signal right out in that little area. And you can see here, once I travel back south towards this next corner, the signal comes back and everything's stable, everything looks good again. And that's exactly what I expected to see based on my test with the V1 transmitter, with the earlier hardware. But the only difference on this flight is I'm using a different antenna. I'm using the Rush FPV Cherry. I'm using Caddx branded one. And I'll kind of show you a picture of it here compared to the stock antenna. It's just sits up taller. It just gives it a more clear shot to radiate its energy out. So you can see now we're still out like 1.2 miles out, down right low on the ground, and we're holding stable 25 megabits per second, even panning out to the side and everything. Everything looks good. There's no real reduction in image quality. It kind of works as expected. So I do believe it's just that short antenna is just not the ideal placement. So we'll get back on to the other flight now. Now at this point, you notice we're about 13, almost 14 minutes into the flight, and the sun is just dipping below the horizon. And I just wanted to include this bit just to get a timestamp, basically, for when the sun set. We'll call it 14 minutes into the flight. So, I mean, up until now, I was just kind of still cruising around out here, basically waiting for the sun to set. Like I said, I wanted to try the improved low light performance of the camera, so I took off a few minutes before sunset. And my intention was to fly a few minutes after sunset. Usually once the sun gets below the horizon, I don't have, 10-15 minutes. It's time to get on the ground after that. So I kind of expected to do about a half-hour flight here and be on the ground. But like I said, we'll call this 14 minutes into the flight for the actual sunset. Now you see we're about 10 or 11 minutes after the sunset. Now you can see it's completely below the horizon. And everything still looks good, especially looking away from the sun. Other than a little bit of color cast, it's kind of got a little reddish hue. Other than that, it basically looks like daylight until you look towards the sunset. You can kind of see that residual light coming over the horizon. Speaking of that color cast, I should point out that I'm using a fixed white balance for this flight. Default, it comes on auto white balance. I just set it to fixed white balance just to see how that looked. I've actually never tried that. I've always flown the original cameras on auto white balance. And I will set this one back to auto white balance after. I was just kind of playing around with some settings, and I didn't really intend to leave it on fixed white balance, but I did for this flight. So we probably wouldn't see that little reddish purplish hue if the camera was able to adjust for that to compensate for it. But I just wanted to kind of point that out. But yeah, like I said, this is what, we're like 12 minutes after sunset now, and everything still looks perfectly fine, perfectly flyable. And like I said, looking away from the sunset where you don't have that residual light coming over the horizon, you can't even really tell it's after sunset. It just kind of looks like daylight. And we'll skip ahead here. This is like 15 minutes after sunset now, and we're kind of venturing back out towards town. You can see all the street lights are on now, and the cell tower there in town has switched over from its white strobing light to its slow breathing red light. And if we look back in the sunset there, you can see it's actually getting a little bit more vibrant color out that way. As the sun sets, it seems that residual light is getting a little brighter. You kind of see that little smoke out there. I guess someone had a little brush fire or something like that in town. But you kind of see the smoke trail in there. It's a steady wind from the east, but it's not real rough, as you can see here. Not like that last video clip I showed you on, which actually took place after this flight we're watching now. It was really rough and turbulent that day. But I just kind of wanted to test my theory with that antenna just to make sure it wasn't an issue with RF range performance, whatever, from the new transmitter. But that doesn't seem to be the case. So yeah, everything's looking pretty good. The camera is pretty deceiving. It looks like it's still plenty of light out, but it definitely didn't look like this to my eyes looking out the window. It was actually pretty dark. I would pretty much call it night at this point. So like I said, we're almost 20 minutes or like 19 minutes after sunset at this point. So now you can see as we get a little bit closer to home, I noticed that that sunset was still getting more and more vibrant, and you can see much better when you look away from it. It seems the camera was maybe kind of starting to struggle a little bit with that bright light toward the sunset. So I decided to just kind of do a little slow turn out here just to see what it looked like in all the different directions. So you can see here we're going to look out over the left wing and make a slow banking turn just to see how the camera works pretty much. Now as we're looking away from the sunset, you see it actually exposes a little bit better. Everything looks brighter, though it does get a little bit more grainy. But it's totally acceptable. And I notice now that we're looking back towards the sunset, you can see the exposure kind of adjusted in steps there. But because we're banking looking down at the ground with a little bit less sky in the frame there, it actually exposed a little bit better. You see here once we level the wing out and we look back toward the sunset with more of that sky, the relatively lit sky in the frame there, it does get a little bit darker on the ground, but it's still totally flyable. So now we're pushing on further. We're almost 30 minutes after sunset now. We're going to just kind of look around a little bit more. And you can see it's actually dark enough now. You can kind of notice the glow on the prop back there looking. It's kind of some of my navigation LEDs that's on the top of the wing back by the motor. They're kind of casting a light onto the prop. I just thought that was kind of neat. You can see the lights out in the town now. Everything's showing pretty good. And it's still a little bit grainy once we look away from the brighter part of the sky, but it's still totally flyable. If you notice that little bit of a glow, that little faint glow right on the horizon, just in front of the wingtip there, that's actually the nearest town. That's about 20 to 25 miles away. I'm not exactly sure how far it is, but that's what that little glow out on the horizon is. I thought that was kind of cool. You can see that. And you see, once we look back towards the lit part of the sky, we're still kind of struggling to expose the ground. But as soon as we tilt the camera down, we'll actually tilt the whole wing down, push the nose down, you can see it exposes everything good. I did see that exposure adjust in steps again, some noticeable steps, and you can kind of see that coming up here as we turn towards the brighter sky. You can see that exposure stepping up and down. I kind of wish that was a more gradual change, but I don't know if that's something they can adjust later, but I would like to see that if it's possible. But yeah, as far as being able to see and everything, it totally acceptable to me. And once again, I can't stress how much different it is between the camera and what I actually see with my eyes looking outside at this point. It's basically night. I can't really see much detail on the ground, and the only way I can see the airplane is from the lights on it. It's pretty deceiving how well it looks in the camera. It looks like it's just late evening, just after sunset. But like I say, we're like a half hour after sunset at this point, and it's definitely what I would call nighttime outside. You can kind of see from those lights on the road back there, and the neighbor street lights right out there. You can kind of see how much light they're casting. And at this point, we're like a half hour after sunset, and it's still totally flyable, but I did have some prior obligations that I needed to get to, so I kind of had to cut the flight at this point. So we'll go ahead and land it here and take a quick look back towards those lights and everything, and there we go. That's going to be the end of the flight. And for now, like I said, I do obviously still have some more things to test. I want to test the onboard recording with the gyroflow data and stuff like that. But there was an issue that came up with some corrupt files and things. It's a bug that Giz FOE actually noticed, and he reached out to me, and I was able to help him confirm that. Well, I just kind of did some testing for him and confirmed that I had the bug with my system too. Caddx tells me they have already figured out the problem, and they will fix it in the next firmware update. So once that's done, I'll be doing some gyroflow video clips testing of that. And for now, this has been the low light test and another quick flight on a windy day that we saw earlier in this one. So hopefully it's a little bit more information to help you out make an informed decision if you want to upgrade to the new camera or the new transmitter or not. One thing I did want to point out though, the GPS performance has increased dramatically with this transmitter, or the lack of noise anyway on the GPS bands. You notice I've been holding like between 22 to 25 satellites for this majority of this flight anyway. And my transmitter is literally mounted about 4 inches from my GPS receiver. And it's nothing but a basic little HGLRC, little cheap GPS module. So yeah, I just thought I would point that out before I forgot. I actually meant to mention that earlier in the video, but I did forget. So I'll just go ahead and let the video run long enough. You can see me walk out with the flashlight to pick the airplane up. And I picked it up to give you a good look at the moon. That was a little bit of moon that was out visible that night. And we'll go ahead and cut it here. So stay tuned for what's to come. So I'll see you all next time.